How to Become Rich. William Windsor. Ladies and gentlemen, in presenting the science of phrenology to you tonight, I make one request and hope you will grant it as a personal favor to me. That is, that you will dismiss from your minds everything that you ever heard about phrenology and listen to my argument with your minds, freed from the prejudices, favorable or unfavorable, that may have been created by other lecturers upon the subject. For this reason, there are, I regret to say, in our country, a class of men lecturing upon phrenology, who have never mastered even the rudiments of the science, who have merely learned the location and nomenclature of the organs of the brain, and who, by flattery and cheap wit, degrade this noble science to the level of mere bumpology, until the average good citizen who has never investigated the subject has come to look upon the term phrenologist as signifying one who goes about over the country feeling the bumps on the heads of those who consult him, looking for hills and hollows, depressions and ridges of the cranium, and predicating thereon a delineation of character. It is my happy privilege tonight to disabuse your minds of this conception and to present phrenology in its true light. And I bespeak from you the thoughtful consideration which an honest man may demand from honest thinking men and women in the investigation of a practical science. I am always able to recognize in my audience three classes of persons. I can tell them by their phrenological appearances whenever they are before me. The first class is composed of those who have already tested phrenology and found it valuable, who have studied the subject and appropriated its truths, and before whom I need not argue its utility. I shall be able to please the members of my audience who belong to this class, and to lead them further in the paths they have already found pleasant and profitable. I shall unfold some new truths and add to their store of valuable knowledge. The second class is composed of that large number of intelligent persons in every community who have not investigated this subject, who are willing to approach it in a spirit of candor and honest inquiry, anxious to accept anything which is reasonable and good, and equally intent upon rejecting that which is fraudulent and evil. And I invite the careful criticism of this class. And if, in my exposition of this subject, I announce a single proposition which will not bear the closest scrutiny, if I say aught which conflicts with common sense or reason, nay, if you can find one single natural fact to militate against the principles which I announce as fundamental to this science, I will be obliged to the gentleman or lady who will raise the question with me, and I will either prove my position to the satisfaction of this audience or retire from the field forever. The third class, unfortunately, are always with us, but I do not expect to convince them. They never were known to be convinced of anything. You can easily learn to distinguish an individual of this class by the shape of his head. Here is one I carry for illustration. He argues that the world is flat and does not revolve on its axis once in 24 hours, because if it did, the water would all be spilled out of the Mississippi River. Life is too short to argue with this class, and I can only promise them that before I leave this platform, they will be in the same category that a fellow was once, who went to a prayer meeting slightly intoxicated and fell asleep. Toward the close of the meeting, everybody began to get happy, and the preacher called on everybody who wanted to go to heaven to stand up. Everybody stood up but our intoxicated friend, who was awakened by the uprising. Then the preacher called on everybody who wanted to go to hell to stand up. Our friend by this time comprehended that something was before the house and staggered to his feet. He took one look at the preacher standing at the other end of the church and said, "Parson, hesh, I don't know what the question is, hash, before the house, but you and I, hash, are in the smallest minority that ever I saw. So it is with you, my friends. If you don't believe in phrenology, when I dismiss you tonight, remember that you are in the minority in this audience, and a very small minority at that, composed of unprogressive mossbacks and persons of small mental capacity. And if you will call at my rooms tomorrow, I'll tell you to which of these classes you belong." In the study of scientific topics, it is well in the outset to establish definitions. I will, therefore, commence by looking our subject squarely in the face and establishing a concise definition of phrenology. Phrenology is the science of intelligence. It is derived from two Greek words, phren, intelligence, logos, discourse, or science. But before we can properly understand this definition, we must have a definition of the term science, which is about as often misused as any word I know. Science is classified knowledge. The word itself, in its etymology, signifies what we know about a particular subject. And whenever we learn two facts about any subject, and we differentiate and classify those two facts, we have a science of that subject. Thus we have the science of astronomy, containing the classified facts that intelligent observers have learned concerning the stars. The science of mathematics, a classification of knowledge concerning numbers, and the science of phrenology, which simply means the facts that intelligent observers have collected concerning intelligence, classified and reduced to rules to serve a practical purpose. Before I leave this term science, I wish to draw a distinction between a science and an art. The science is the classified knowledge. The art is the process of turning that knowledge to practical account. The science of astronomy never discovered a star. The science of arithmetic never computed the value of a fraction. The sciences are merely icebergs of cold, hard facts piled up in crystallized principles and rules. Art is the warm, living application of these principles and rules to serve the needs of mankind. The art of astronomy, with the assistance of its handmaiden, the art of mathematics, astounds the world with its achievements and holds in one hand the balances with which it weighs the sun, and in the other, the chain with which it surveys the distance to the Pleiades. So with the science and art of phrenology. The science is as absolute as mathematics. In its principles, there are no fallacies. To its rules, there are absolutely no exceptions. The art of phrenology, on the other hand, is estimative, and the results of its application will depend on the graces, the gifts, and the abilities of him who seeks to apply it. As we have brilliant astronomers and poor astronomers, as we have correct mathematicians and incorrect ones, so we may have phrenologists whose discoveries and whose workmanship may command the admiration of the world, those whose talents are of the order of mediocrity, and those who blunder on all occasions. You have had phrenology defined to you as the science of intelligence, and you naturally ask for a definition of intelligence itself. Intelligence is the result of the radiation of magnetism from every object in the universe. Magnetism is radiated by different bodies in different degrees of intensity. Man is provided with 7 distinct organs of sense, which receive and interpret these radiations. The lowest rate of vibration is received and interpreted by the sense of gender, and the next stage by the sense of touch. Above that, we have the senses of taste, hearing, sight, smell, and clairvoyance. So that the human body is in reality a magnetic musical instrument of 7 octaves, each octave constituting a separate sense, and each sense subdivided into 7 degrees. The radiation of magnetism from exterior objects strikes the human body in these different degrees of vibration, and it is the ability of the body to receive these vibrations and of the brain to analyze them, which constitutes the intelligence of the individual. The absence of any organ of sense or the absence of any part of the brain needed in its analysis is accompanied by the corresponding absence or diminution of intelligence. Reasoning therefore from these premises, it follows that by inspection of the organization of an individual and by careful examination of his organs of sense and brain capacity, we are able to determine how much intelligence he possesses and in what direction it will be projected. When we study its development and its deterioration, its faculties and their manifestation, we amass a glittering pile of brilliant facts. We classify those facts, reduce them to rules to serve the needs of the human race, and we have the science of phrenology. And when we apply those rules in the practical delineation of character, we have the art. In regard to phrenology being an exact science, I have shown you that the distinction must be drawn between the principles of the science and the results of their estimative application. The principles of the science are absolute. In his application of them, the examiner is hampered by the frailties and fallibilities of the human intellect, just to the same extent that the skilled surgeon or the bright astronomer is subject to the same drawbacks. Would any sensible man decline the services of a skilled surgeon in the hour of need, because surgeons differ in judgment, or in some cases make mistakes? Astronomy is regarded as a wonderfully exact science because an eclipse can be computed 100 years in advance to the fraction of a second, yet astronomers differ in regard to the distance of the sun from the earth to the trifling extent of 6 million miles. Shall we therefore reject astronomy? Phrenology is not a fully developed science. I am glad it is not. I would regret it if a bar should be set to the acquisition of knowledge upon this subject. As long as human intelligence advances, as long as the race improves, as long as men have eyes to see and intellects to comprehend scientific facts, phrenology will advance. But when you ask me whether phrenology is sufficiently developed to be of practical value to mankind in its application, when you ask me to compare its development with that of any other science, I answer unhesitatingly that phrenology is the queen regnant of all sciences, of greater value to the human race than all other sciences combined, because it is the science of humanity itself. Greater than astronomy, because humanity is worth more than all the stars that scintillate in the heavens. Greater than mathematics, because humanity is better than numbers. Greater than geology and zoology, as humanity is above the rocks and animals. Greater than theology, because it teaches man to know himself, instead of presumptively speculating upon gods and dogmas. Greater than all combined, because phrenology bears upon her resplendent crown the jewels of knowledge, virtue, morality, culture, temperance, wealth, and progress, and is pregnant with possibilities of good beyond the present comprehension of the human imagination. And when you ask me if phrenology is developed in the number of practical facts at her command, I answer that for every principle and rule of mathematics that are serviceable, I will give you 2 in phrenology. For every discovery in geology, I will give you 4 in the domain of the mind. For every fact in zoology, entomology, or botany that has been of value, I will give you 6 in the science of humanity. Then you may begin to comprehend the appeal which phrenology makes tonight to your selfish interests. I wish now to draw a distinction between phrenology and physiognomy, because I don't believe I ever went into any community to lecture in my life, that I did not hear some old fossil say that he believed in the science of physiognomy, but he didn't take much stock in phrenology. Now I beseech you, as friends of mine, and after I have lectured to an audience for 20 minutes, I always feel that I have so many friends in it that I am personally interested in the welfare of each one. That if you have ever made that remark, you will not expose your ignorance of scientific terms in that way again. I'll excuse you for what you have done heretofore, but if you make that remark after hearing my lectures, I shall feel ashamed of you, just as I always feel humiliated when any friend of mine makes a fool of himself. Physiognomy is the science of external appearances. The etymology of the word signifies the knowledge of nature, derived from examination or observation. We may speak of the physiognomy of a landscape, of a country, a state, a continent, or an individual, and by that we mean the external appearance, that which conveys a knowledge of the character of the object to the eye. We judge the character of the thing by its appearances, and in the relation which physiognomy bears to character reading, we judge the character of the man by the external appearances. We study the size and form of the body, its color, its texture, its temperament, the expression of the face, and the contour of the head, all of which are physiognomical. We draw certain conclusions from this inspection of the physiognomical signs, and these conclusions are phrenological. For every variation of color, form, or size indicates a corresponding variation in a particular kind or intelligence possessed by the individual. Physiognomy, therefore, is the grand channel through which we draw our phrenological conclusions, and in this relation, physiognomy forms a part of the grand science of phrenology, inseparable from it, and bearing about the same relation to it that addition does to arithmetic. There are those who advertise themselves as delineators of character under the term physiognomists. I believe that such persons do so because they lack the ability and learning to comprehend phrenology and are unable to combat the prejudices of the ignorant. I have never seen a so-called physiognomist who was not an empirical mountebank of the purest stamp, and who did not trim his sails to ponder to the silly sentiment which I have just exposed. The delineations of such persons are worse than valueless, because they are pure guesswork. They pursue a shadow while they reject the substance. Having thus established our definitions, we may proceed to state the principles of phrenology. And I believe that I can best do so by taking you through the successive steps of a phrenological examination, and by thus practicing the art, illustrate the science. In forming an estimate of the character of any person, the practical phrenologist proceeds upon the following physiological postulates, which I shall not stop to demonstrate, because they may be regarded as established facts, upon which all physiological authorities are agreed, viz. 1. The brain is the keyboard of the body and the central seat of intelligence. 2. The power of the brain depends upon the anatomical and physiological condition of the body, which supports it. 3. The character of any object depends upon its physical attributes, viz., size, weight, color, form, texture, density, etc.